Hi everybody, this is Adam, the creator and lead developer of Railroader. Railroader, if you're unfamiliar, is an operations-focused railroad simulator. In Railroader, you serve the communities of Appalachia by running a railroad, delivering cars to your customers, running passenger trains, repairing your equipment, and so forth. Railroader is unique among train games in that it emphasizes realistic operations on a short-line railroad, switching cars, classifying cuts, without getting too bogged down in the details. It's available now for PC in early access on Steam. In fact, Railroader has been in early access for exactly 1 year. 1 year, can you believe it? Well, we thought it was important to make this video not only to commemorate 1 year of progress, but also to give you an update on where we're at with the game and where we're headed. But before I get to those though, just who is this we I keep referring to? If you're not aware, Railroader is made by a very small dev team. One software developer, that's me, one producer, co-game designer, sounding board extraordinaire, Connor, and several current modelers, Elijah, Ben, Kyle, and Chance. We're also supported by our community management team. So, how has this past year gone? In many respects, I'm so proud of what we've accomplished and the progress we've made on the game in this time. In others, to be perfectly honest with you, and transparency is a theme in this video, I thought we'd be a lot further along by now. The big picture good news is that Railroader has done well enough that it is now my full-time job, which is incredible to be able to focus on the game, and without that, some of the bigger new features probably wouldn't have been possible. But I've learned that full-time game development is also its own kind of pressure. But more on that in a bit though. So, what have we accomplished? When I look back on it, our work this year has been focused on 3 areas: auto engineer enhancements, revisions to our equipment models, and building out wear and tear related mechanics. More than any other feature, the auto engineer has received the most attention this year. Since launch, the auto engineer has undergone a significant number of revisions under the hood, with more to come. The auto engineer has learned to stop at passenger stations, whistle for crossings, and on the experimental branch, waypoint mode makes auto engineers dramatically more capable, enabling them to carry out complex moves between tracks. We've added 3 new steam engines, as well as completed a number of significant revisions to existing engines, with more to come on both counts. We've introduced wear and tear, overhaul, and revised repair mechanics, along with adding oiling and hot boxes to add more depth to running your railroad, without letting it get too tedious. And if you find these are tedious, you can turn them off in the settings. We've also added numerous quality of life features, such as notices, the right-click menu, switch audit logs, CTC switch unlocking, switches on the map, enhanced tooltips, telegraph poles. We've added a roster window, made railroad fuel service cars leave and then return the following day. We've added custom key bindings, and an awesome new chuff sound. I've invested numerous days into hunting down performance issues and plan to continue doing so. Dozens and dozens of bug fixes, the list goes on and on. And finally, if I may say so, I think we've done incredibly well at delivering and refining a very solid core gameplay experience. We've created an environment where you can run a railroad, in single player and multiplayer. We've invested so much in auto engineers because we hear from our players how important they are in helping them run the kind of railroad they want to run. People are pretty ambitious. I'm particularly proud of waypoint mode. It's the kind of feature that I thought would be cool, but I didn't think we'd be able to get it in the first year. Oh, and a quick sidebar while we're talking about good things. Even though modding isn't officially supported, there's some seriously impressive modding going on for Railroader. Official modding support is on our roadmap, but before we do that, we want to ensure we aren't going to make any major changes to how engines work, for example. Regardless, we love seeing what people are building. So those are the things I think we've done well. What haven't we done so well on? The biggest thing I haven't done a great job at is communicating with you, the community, about what we're doing. I'm a pretty quiet person and I prefer to let the work speak for itself, but I recognize that more is needed. Connor and our community team are great at being present in Discord and the Steam forums, but we haven't done as much as we should have in communicating at a higher level. You're probably aware that videos like this are very time-consuming to make, and it always felt like the development was more important. Before you know it, it's been over a year since the last update video. This is something we know is important, and we will strive to improve upon it as we move forward. Also, I expected us to get on top of creating buildings for the map much sooner than we did. We've struggled with making progress on this until recently because, with a small team, there were other priorities. We wanted to improve the models we already had, and we believed it was more important to work out the game mechanics than it was to work on the scenery. You can always make the scenery better, but game mechanics are much harder to get right. The good news is that a new member of our team, Ben, is really great at buildings, and we finally have some good progress there, which I'm excited for you to finally see. The final thing we haven't done as well as I'd like is delivering new releases this fall. So it's been 2 months since our last public release on the Railroader experimental branch. For many games, that's not unusual at all, but for Railroader and my own personal unofficial goals for releasing updates, it's felt like a very long time. So what's made it so difficult, you ask? It all has to do with time, really, or more specifically the way time interacts with mechanics in Railroader. The non-experimental branch version of the game has a time multiplier setting. It's like a model railroad fast clock. It doesn't affect train movement, it only makes industries and the sun move faster. It was a fun feature to have, but it was preventing us from building game mechanics that relate to time. Take the 4-hour passenger travel time limit, for example. Not only would the code be confusing, but a lot of the players would be confused too. Is that for real-time hours or for game time hours? If the time multiplier changes, what happens to the passengers? It's important to us that Railroader be accessible and understandable, and mechanic interactions that raise questions like this are a red flag. Something needed to give, and it was going to be the time multiplier. Plus, we had another time-related mechanic we wanted to add: timetables. I wanted to add timetables to Railroader for a long time, for 3 reasons. Number 1, they look cool. Number 2, they're a key component of timetable and train order operations, which, while cool, let's be real, it's not something that many people are going to use. But it would be great to be able to configure a timetable for your railroad, even if just for world building purposes. And 3, perhaps most importantly, timetables are a logical path to more compelling passenger operations. Passenger operations in Railroader are rather simplistic. Passengers gather randomly with random destinations, with more passengers gathering in areas with more active industries. Kind of makes sense. But timetables allow passengers to gather in anticipation of a train, with destinations that correspond to the schedule. With timetables, you can get more passenger revenue if you stick to your schedule. In other words, if you run more realistically, you're rewarded. So in early October, I set to work on a timetable feature. It was a lot of work. It required enhancements to the UI tooling to enable displaying timetables, as well as a lot of logic to interpret the timetable in various ways. By late October, and mind you, I'd been working on a number of other smaller items during this time, I had the first version of timetables ready for internal testing. But it didn't go over quite as I hoped. I knew that a visual timetable editor would be a lot of work, so in true Agile programmer fashion, I devised a nice way to describe timetables using simple text files. But it turns out these text files were not as simple as I thought they were. The feedback was clear. A visual editor was necessary. However, an auto engineer assigned to an appropriate train crew was capable of holding at a passenger stop until the timetable departure time. They could also announce whether they were late or not. So at least that part was pretty cool. If I wanted the timetable feature to live on, I'd need to build an editor. This was quite daunting. UI work takes a lot of time, and this would be one of the most complicated pieces of UI in Railroader. I was in a tough spot. I had some bug fixes and small enhancements, but I didn't have anything that felt substantive that I could show publicly. I felt that I needed to press on, to chase the feature, to justify the time spent. But I wondered, was I on the right track? Was this a good use of my time? Discouraged, I worked on model support and bug fixes. I built a bridge and a custom shader for structures. I molded direction on the timetable feature. I came back to it. It took a few days, but before Thanksgiving, I had a working timetable editor. Still, though, I worried, would players actually use timetables? Creating a timetable requires knowledge of the route, patience to test and refine them. We emphasize player agency and flexibility in Railroader. Would timetables be too rigid? I enhanced the editor to display an estimate of the time between stations and a warning if there wasn't enough time. So much time invested, and the anniversary drew closer. Would there be enough time? Let's take a breath. We're so fortunate that Railroader has the audience it has. So fortunate to have heard from so many of you about how much you love playing it, to have met and talked with some of you in person. One of my favorite things is to open Discord and see friends whose status is playing Railroader. It means a lot. One thing I've been surprised by is how that positive force can become its own special kind of pressure. Don't mess it up. That pressure can work on you. I feel like it has with this timetable work. We're still in early access, and even though Railroader has that solid core, we've still got a lot that we want to add to it. Meaningful new ways to interact with the world, be it through timetables, express service, MOW, but we also don't want to change things in ways that are too complicated to be fun, or that break the game that means so much to so many of you. This balance, making these decisions, testing them, and iterating, and staying on the right track, so to speak, is perhaps the toughest part of the job. But it's a job that we're very lucky to have. Sometimes in development it takes a long time to get to something that you're ready to share with the world. I was only able to build some of the more sophisticated parts of the game because I had extended time to focus on them. Our team size is small, but I think that small teams can do great things. Perhaps the simplest solution to the tough spot I was in would have been to post about it. We're here, we're working on something, and it's taking longer than we hoped. So where does this leave us? We're going to continue our work on the experimental branch, with an eye toward a new release in December, if at all possible, with timetables as an opt-in feature. If you want to run passengers without a timetable, you'll be able to do that. The release will also include new buildings and auto-engineer waypoint fixes, among others. Then, we'll listen to your feedback as we determine how we want to proceed with the experimental branch. We've recently refined and updated our roadmap, link in the description, to reflect the progress on roadmap items as well as how we are thinking about prioritizing the future work between ongoing, 1.0, and post-early access. There's a lot there, but we've got some great plans around express and mail service that I'm excited to get to work on. We're also talking internally about how we can sustainably keep you updated on our progress. So that's it for this update. Thank you as always for playing and for your support. Happy release anniversary, Railroader.